Today, I will be discussing my thoughts on the concept of AuDHD. Um, and I will be discussing non-pathological variations of this term, and also just my thoughts on this as an AuDHD person who has explored his AuDHD identity and interacted with other AuDHD people, and just AuDHD as a concept. You see, people cannot be diagnosed with both ADHD and autism in one day. No one can be diagnosed with both ADHD and autism in one day. And very often, diagnoses of ADHD and autism come at separate times in one's life. So a person goes for several years, perhaps even several decades, not fully understanding who they are because they know that they're one thing but not the other. In reality, and I know this may be a hot take in some circles, I am firmly of the belief that autism and ADHD are two extensions of the same core concept of AuDHD, or rather the same core concept of monotropism. But I'll get to that later. AuDHD is not recognized as a neurotype, as a neurological condition. There's autism and then there's ADHD. But AuDHD, the majority of autistic people have some form of ADHD, and a very significant portion of people who have ADHD also are autistic in some form or another, or at least on the broad autistic phenotype. The overlap between ADHD and autism is immense, yet AuDHD is not recognized formally at all. In fact, the term AuDHD only originated within the past 5 years or so, if I recall correctly. You see, what really unites autism and ADHD as one phenomenon, and what really makes it easier to understand autism and ADHD as two extensions of the same concept rather than two separate neurotypes, is the idea of monotropism. Simply put, monotropism is behind stimming, repetitive hand movements and repetitive body movements, info dumping, monologism, other things like that. It's behind all of those things, and it is the tendency to focus on one thing at one time. And it's not just focus, it's not just hyperfixation, it is a fundamental design of the brain to be focused in one flow state at a time and be very imagine this is like your third eye, and it's a laser coming out, not a flashlight coming out of your brain, a laser coming out of your brain. That's monotropism. Not just a general ambient glow of light, not a flashlight, a laser. That's monotropism. Autistic people are monotropic. We are known for our repetitive behaviors. We are known for our behaviors in which we are very intensely focused on one thing at a time. We are known for our very deep dives into subjects of our interest. We are known for these things. We are known for having very singular, one-focused brains, and that can be good for a lot of things. It's just that with ADHD is really kinetic monotropism, and I'll explain what that means. ADHD stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. On the one hand, you have the problem of ADHD, that's a pathological term. D is deficit or disorder in the word ADHD. But the thing with ADHD is that it's not a deficit of attention. It's not a disorder, of course, and it's not a deficit of attention either. What it really is a distribution of attentional resources in which it's really dopamine fueled. In the same way that autism is known for sensory differences in sensory processing, ADHD is known for differences in the processing of dopamine and the firing of dopamine. People who are ADHD will become extremely hyper-focused on something that generates dopamine, that generates a dopamine response, even if it's not something that they may otherwise be interested in, and something that does not generate a dopamine response is boring. Such is the nature of the ADHD brain. Yet the ADHD brain is still monotropic in terms of how it focuses on things and in terms of how it practices and lives life. It's just that ADHD is kinetic monotropism. It's interest-based. It's, maybe you could say, interest-based nervous system. That's another word that has been put forth from the autistic and ADHD community, an interest-based nervous system. A nervous system which is based on interests rather than tasks at hand or whatnot. And it tends to be in much shorter bursts than in pure autism or only autism. And to that point, I would say, well, is ADHD part of autism or is autism part of ADHD? I would say that ADHD is part of monotropism. Autism is monotropic, ADHD is monotropic, but autism is not kinetic. Pure autism is not kinetic. And therefore, if one were to use the terms ADHD and autism, then yes, under that language, ADHD would be considered a variant or an extension of autism, but autism is considered more of the core source. But, I guess with the concept of AuDHD, it's more so that one has tendencies towards both what is classified as autism and what is classified as ADHD. Obviously, it's much more fluid than just that. And really, AuDHD is a spectrum in that way. There's autism, and then there's AuDHD, and then there's pure ADHD. The only thing I have against making it a diagnosable condition is because I want to depathologize the conditions of autism and ADHD. I want to depathologize these neurotypes, and I want to take the pathologization of these neurotypes outside of the hands of medical professionals. I want to take it outside of medical professionals and outside of the medical establishment because human experiences are not medical conditions. I do not want to see this made into a medical condition of its own, but I do want to see AuDHD recognized in the world as a real thing, because AuDHD is different from pure autism or pure ADHD. Obviously, it's a continuum. It's a continuum, and it's very hard to determine where exactly AuDHD ends and where autism begins, or where exactly AuDHD ends and where ADHD begins. It's very hard to tell. But in a world where there's diagnostic criteria for autism, and then there's diagnostic criteria for ADHD, there's understanding of autism, and there's understanding of ADHD, but then there's not correct understanding of the overlap of these two neurotypes, or rather of these two experiences, which really are the same neurotype, just manifesting in different ways, I suppose. And an example of this is masking. In AuDHD, masking can be a lot more intense and severe. For the number one reason, one of the reasons why is because if someone is diagnosed with ADHD but not autism, or autism but not ADHD, they're masking part of their identity because they don't fully understand part of their identity and they still feel self-conscious about it. The internalized ableism takes root. The second thing about AuDHD and masking is that ADHD, one of the characteristics of ADHD is being hypercritical of oneself. And low self-esteem, and whether this is due to society's ableism or due to some inherent characteristic of ADHD, we're still figuring that out as researchers and as a community. But it is something that must be considered and factored into the masking of autism, because the masking of AuDHD is not just the masking of pure autism, it's the masking of an entire brain, which is not fully understood, which is not fully accounted for by an autism diagnosis or by an ADHD diagnosis. There, that's what I wanted to say. An autism diagnosis and an ADHD diagnosis alone do not fully account for the experience of AuDHD. Do not fully account for the experience of AuDHD. And yeah, that's what I wanted to say about the concept of AuDHD and my thoughts on AuDHD as a AuDHD person exploring my AuDHD identity. And to finish this up, I would add some non-pathological terms. In my view, the term autism, although it originated as a pathological term, has been reclaimed, if you will, by the autistic community. And therefore, I, as an autistic person, proudly refer to myself as autistic. I don't view the term autism or autistic as pathological. I consider myself to be autistic, and I identify as autistic. The thing is, with ADHD, that's a pathological term. There are two variants. One is proposed by Dr. Nick Walker, kinetic cognitive style, KCS. That's one word. The other one is interest-based nervous system. Both IBNS, interest-based nervous system, and kinetic cognitive style, KCS, both I think are valid ways of understanding what was formerly known as ADHD. And as an AuDHD person, I don't see really... I mean, sometimes I use the term AuDHD, such as in this video, for ease of explanation and for ease of connection with other folks who might themselves identify as AuDHD. But personally, I use the term MKS, monotropic kinetism. Monotropic kinetism. That is the term I use for AuDHD. Thanks for watching.